All right. Well, this is the last panel of today. It's been a long day, so hopefully, it'll be interesting enough to keep everyone engaged and excited. So thank you very much again for attending this panel, and thank you to the CELE team as well, of course, for such a fantastic set of events that has already happened and that will happen over the next couple of days. I am Min. I am the Accountability and Innovation Manager at GNI, and I'm joined by 5 esteemed panelists here. So what I would like to start with is just to briefly explain why we're doing this panel. So today we are launching the policy brief on government interventions in AI, which essentially explains the human rights implications of government interventions in artificial intelligence. It was written with strong inputs from the GNI's multi-stakeholder AI working group, and many of them are actually on this panel as well. So thank you everyone for participating in that working group. The brief looks at 5 main ways that governments are shaping AI. So whether it's through hard regulations, soft regulations, investments, procurement, or informal influence, and across different layers of the AI value chain. So think of it as a matrix, where the 3 layers are AI infrastructure, AI development, and AI deployment. We look at a taxonomy of within that taxonomy, we look at examples from around the world on the many ways that governments are encouraging, how they're steering, and how they are regulating AI. So that policy brief essentially shows that government actions on AI can go both ways, as one might imagine, right? So on the positive side, things like encouraging human rights risk assessments, risk-based regulations, privacy laws, inclusive investments, and how all that positively impacts rights. But at the same time, how the risk looks at examples of overbroad censorship, biased surveillance, restrictive export controls, or indeed weak legal safeguards, and how all these can deepen inequality and harm rights. In the end, the brief essentially urges governments and other key players, such as companies and civil society, to anchor all their kind of interventions and activities on AI on international human rights law. And it offers practical, actionable recommendations on making that happen. So that's, I guess, my marketing pitch for the policy brief. I will now pause that. And just highlight what the purpose of this panel is, and it's for our speakers to share their real-life experiences of government interventions in AI. So I would like to frame the session, first of all. So, in line with the marketing pitch, just one more, if I may. You can access that policy brief by scanning that QR code on the right of the slide that you see. But yeah, the way that the session will run is that I will give roughly 3 minutes, given we have a large number of esteemed panelists, 3 minutes each to address some of the questions that I hope to raise. I will then ask 2 to 3 questions of my own to the panelists, and following on from that, we will have an audience Q&A for the remaining half hour. I mentioned that the policy brief frames the taxonomy of government interventions in AI as a matrix, and you can see that matrix on the slide on the right-hand side. And just wanted to flag that when the panelists answer their questions, they may be referring to that matrix, so it's good that you have that on the slide for your reference. All right, without further ado, I will stop talking and request our panelists to start talking. And if the panelists could speak directly into the mic for the benefit of the translator, that would be amazing. So starting first with Mishi, if I may. So Mishi, in the Indian context, which government interventions in AI do you find most concerning? And specifically, where do you feel that they risk becoming overly broad and disproportionate?
Okay, thank you. I think I want to start with something which Edward Snowden told us a long time ago. We trusted the governments not to screw us, but they did. We trusted the tech companies not to take advantage of us, but they did. that is going to happen again, because that is the nature of power. And I think it is happening already, and we are living through that as constantly we are being distracted by some fantastic notion of AGI so that you don't pay attention to the large-scale pilfering which is going on and the theft which is going on and the current problems. So India, which is an entire continent in itself, does have a very aggressive approach on AI, which I'm actually quite glad about, because we do have an educational capacity to build our own if we got our priorities right. But the ifs are always pretty big, and we never get our priorities right. So if we committed to using the technology of machine learning to enhance democracy and civil liberty, not as the United States or Beijing's vision is to destroy it, we would get it right. You did ask me about the matrix and stick to the policy brief. And so I think I want to talk a little bit about investment and the partial hard governance plus soft governance and the diffuse and informal interventions which have happened so far. On the investment piece, what bothers me most is that with the aggressive industrialization, there is a risk of inadequate governance. We are still figuring out what our data protection regime looks like, what privacy looks like, and algorithmic accountability is iffy. And if these are only going to increase unless they are built from the start. We have a data center expansion target, and that suggests a massive scaling of digital infrastructure. But there is no strong interoperable or open standards under which a framework can be built. What we are right now doing is we're like, oh, we don't like these American platforms, let's move to an Indian platform, but that's just another vendor lock-in, instead of saying that we have a policy, we're going to move to an open source implementation, and then you build something on your own. There is a policy target of capturing 10% of global semiconductor market by 2030. It shows a lot of ambition, but it also raises concerns about the urgency pushing forward without any talk of rights, inclusion, sustainability safeguards. I think that we haven't, in our countries, we haven't talked about at all about the labor studies, the actual impact on people. We have a very large population, and we are not interested in the next self-driving car. And our priorities are very different from what the priorities of other markets are. And those labor studies focus on perceptions or high-level commentary, but not long-term empirical tracking of what job displacement looks like, what is going to be the impact on wages, what's going to be the impact on each sector, and what changes come in. And of course, the environment, which nobody wants to pay attention to. We are already facing a lot of problems with clean water, clean air, and there is relatively very little public data on the full footprint of an infrastructure, which is India's infrastructure. And the second major thing which really bothers me is the vision creep and the undue surveillance which is going to happen. We already have a pretty large digital public infrastructure which we are trying to force on the rest of the world as well, with the help of World Bank and Mr. Gates. So we have UPI, Aadhaar, CoWIN, everything else, and each of these initiatives, they strengthen capability, but it also means there's going to be a lot of data which was siloed earlier is now going to be able to be shared. And that leads to a lot of centralization of data and increased risk of mass surveillance, et cetera. Some of the policies have been fun, offhand ones, like, oh, you ask a question to Gemini, whether X person is a fascist or not. I do not know how many leaders will pass that test these days. And Gemini said, oh, yes, here is some more data. Oh, how dare you do that? And then an advisory will come from the government to say, well, you will have to actually get permission from us before you ever release any model. And then Gemini says, I'm so sorry, we're unreliable. But this actually shows immaturity of the conversation and also knee-jerk responses which are not predictable either for businesses or for even the civil society, which is much more concerned about that your old rights are not in place and now you are just forcing something down the throat without examining, that is a concern. So.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot to think about. And obviously, things that are happening in India, and as we heard from some of the questions from the previous panel, can also influence what happens elsewhere in the world. So yeah, on that note, maybe I'll pass the question over to Cristian. Maybe a similar question. So in Latin American countries, and I guess with a focus maybe on the area that you specifically work in Bolivia, what sort of government use of AI do you see as having the most chilling effects on civil space and dissent?
Sure. Thank you, Min, and thank you, GNI and CELE for organizing all of this. So now I'm going to change to Spanish. Para responder esta pregunta, voy a tomar
In order to respond to this question, I will take two licenses. First of all, in the IA bag, I'll include many technologies that probably are not AI, but somehow are interpreted to be AI. The other license is I'm going to talk about cases that have been researched by a number of Latin American organizations, and I will there talk about those cases. But if you guys want to know more about this, the best thing is to ask the organizations that have engaged in the research, which are many of the ones here with us today. In Latin America, and perhaps it's not different from other regions worldwide, but there are some peculiar characteristics. AI is being applied in three aspects that are of concern. First is surveillance, mass surveillance, direct surveillance of certain people with political ends sometimes. The second one is AI applied to prediction for public policy. And then the third one for social profiling. Quite often this type of use is being justified from something that was said in the previous panel, and that is national security or homeland security against drug trafficking, organized crime. Systems are being put in place which have a strong potential of impacting rights. Let me give you some examples which have been researched by organizations, many of which are part of the Al-Sor consortium. In Colombia, there are two initiatives that have been researched. One of them is called Invisible Man in Spanish, under which journalists, activists, and opposition individuals are being investigated with assisted AI. And this type of digital espionage, because of homeland security, is undermining several rights, freedom of expression, freedom of speech for journalism, and others. In Colombia, there's a system called Fiscal Watson. I don't know why they call it like that, but it's natural language processing to review critical criminal data, but quite blurry, and lack of knowledge of the way the data analysis processes is being used. In Chile, the policemen are putting files together on feminist, environmental, indigenous leaders in protests by aggregating data by IA and keyword surveillance in the same country. The urban crime predictive system, which is attempting to predict crime hotspots by using urban data and also police records, but with a great probability that there will be algorithmic discrimination risks and space stigmatization, especially in the poorest area. And I could keep on and on with cases you find in Brazil, in Paraguay, and Mexico. There's this very concerning scenario as to interoperability in private and public databases being put together for homeland security reasons, but infringing a number of rights. This information and sharing you can find in reports that have been drafted by the ALSOR Consortium and other Latin American organizations. And let me add that last week we published a report on the use of surveillance technologies by governments. You can download it and have a deep look at it. But to summarize, all these practices show that in weak oversight context with little transparency, while you find all these factors together in the justification of fighting organized crime, IA is being used to expand these pre-existing factors of control and surveillance that sometimes are mixed with political intent. Of course, this makes us quite concerned, and this may prompt authoritarian behavior.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Cristian. And obviously, we share your observation that there's no shortage of examples if we want to give it. That's certainly an issue we encountered when writing the policy brief together with the AI working group. Moving now to Europe, perhaps, where rights protections are relatively stronger. Maybe asking Marlena, what are your key concerns about government interventions in AI that might still threaten freedom of expression and privacy rights?
Yeah, thanks, Min. So I'll speak about two main narratives that we see in Europe now. One is simplification, and the other one securitization. So simplification is maybe the opposite of what you asked me. It's not overreach, it's under-enforcing existing laws. And we've heard now the European Commission talk about the digital omnibus, which is basically a simplification effort to either pause, slow down, or stop the implementation of some existing European laws. We'll know by November 19th, 2025, so in a few weeks, what their thinking is on that front. And on the civil society side, we really see simplification as actually deregulation and risking dismantling existing key protections. So at ECNL and other organizations, including EDRI, we've strongly opposed that. And we really see it as a political drive aiming at deregulating at both the EU and national levels on various member state levels. This also deepens the influence of corporate lobbying in EU policymaking, and key laws like the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, e-Privacy, AI Act, which my organization has worked a lot on, and Data Government Acts are not actually overreaching in any way. In fact, the previous versions of the AI Act were much stronger, and they ended up being watered down for political reasons. And so the challenges lie not in overreach, but more in under-enforcement and under-resourcing. So that's the first issue. The second one, which responds more directly to your question, is securitization. From the EU side, from civil society, it would be more surveillance, and so that follows on my other colleagues' comments. And actually, Rafa, who mentioned national security at the end of his at the end of his points, that is really something we're looking at a lot at ECNL. So the EU has no competency to regulate on national security. That's a member state prerogative. However, they can define how member states, what conditions member states use to define national security. And it's a super broad term, like Rafa said. Historically, it's been used a lot for counterterrorism efforts or border control increasingly now as well. Article 2 AI Act includes a blanket exemption. So that means if governments use AI systems in the name or for the purposes of national security, they no longer have to respect the safeguards of AI Act. That's a huge problem and a really big loophole, which we're hoping to fight in court, actually, with ECNL. And just briefly on that note, because it's a whole issue, but it's very political. So member states have two options. They can either, if they want EU support, they will not use national security as a framing, and we've seen that after 2015 Paris terrorist attacks, for example, when they wanted EU support, and that led to the PNR directive. However, the trend right now is to actually frame everything as a national security issue, which means that they have more autonomy, less EU oversight, and also they have an exemption, member states have exemption, where they do not have to apply the AI Act at all. So I'll just very briefly, before closing, mention a few countries that are using this right now and weaponizing this exemption. There's Hungary, which this year made amendments to its national law to criminalize LGBTI communities. And in this year's Pride, they actually, the law expanded the use of biometric surveillance to identify protesters and then criminalize them. So for us, this is like just such a blatant example of real use, real-time biometric surveillance in the public space, which is a violation of Article 5 of the AI Act, which prohibits the most dangerous use cases of AI systems. But other countries in the EU also use retrospective RBI, so remote biometric identification. France is a key one. From 2015, the Intelligence Act, where they provided algorithmic data analysis for counterterrorism and monitoring messaging apps and websites, to most recently the Foreign Interference Law in 2024, where now France can deploy experimental algorithms to detect suspicious activity in the name of national security, and many other examples of the Netherlands and Germany. So I'll stop here, but that's basically how we see AI regulation today in EU. It's both simplification on one side with a lot of corporate lobbying, and on the other it's a securitization where in the name of national security, AI member states and the EU can weaponize AI systems.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Marlena. So I guess the point that rights protections are comparatively stronger is, I guess, the key point, comparatively. So we're moving over to Miranda, perhaps. So Miranda, as a a global vertically integrated AI player, Meta is obviously exposed to nearly all types of government interventions that we cover in the brief. So in your opinion, like what type of government interventions worry you most, and how indeed is Meta approaching the challenge of embedding human rights safeguards into AI development and deployment in light of such demands?
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here. In my human rights defender life, I actually worked for a long time on and with transitional justice issues. So Argentina and the Argentinian and Latin American human rights defenders and their movement have a special place in my skills and in my heart. So it's great to be here and very intimidating. Look, in 3 minutes, I can't possibly kind of go to the question, but let me switch gears a little bit. As a citizen of Australia, I recommend people interested in the application of automated systems to sensitive social use cases to read the Royal Commission report on our Robodebt scandal. That's not part of my meta job. I just say, if you don't know about that, have a look. It's a very good application of truth-telling and kind of ombudsman powers into the misapplication of an automated system. In terms of Meta, look, I'll speak briefly about government interventions into AI models. And in particular, you know, many of us here are used to, particularly as members of the GNI, government orders to take down or restrict content. And AI-related requests of this nature flip the paradigm that we're all used to in important ways that, you know, are novel and we're still at the beginning of, and we don't have a lot of scale yet. But first of all, AI-related takedown requests don't typically target users' speech. They target the content or expression of the AI model itself, and that the model produces in response to user prompts. So this does have potentially important, I think, implications for things like intermediate liability that I'm sure many of the legal brains in this room are already deeply concerned with. Second, because AI models can produce similar responses, similar output in response to an infinite variety of prompts. So AI-related takedown requests or orders don't narrowly target a specific piece of content or, in the words, or a specific URL. So immediately you can see their proportionality problems potentially right there and a lot of other interesting issues. So this means that attempts to fully comply with a government order could have wide consequences. For example, and it's not particularly theoretical,
You could imagine an order to prevent a model from producing the image of a particular person. So you could restrict outputs for a prompt related to that person's name. But what if a user just says the position of that person or gives a description of that person in detail related to their role or to their age or to their fame? You know, you can immediately see the problem that the product could produce that image anyway. So there are a lot of interesting issues there. And thirdly, we do expect that many potential requests to companies for AI models might not just ask for a restriction of specific speech, as traditional takedown requests do, but they may also aim to compel particular content or expression. So, for example, it could be a request not only to restrict outputs on the human rights record of a particular government, but to provide you with that government's approved narrative instead. And again, this isn't particularly theoretical. I think people who are following the space are seeing this kind of thing emerging in some of the locally produced models in countries with far weaker human rights records. So, I mean, how have been working to safeguard this? Well, you know, lots of different things, but let me call out, I think, 2 steps. One, in 2024, expecting that we would receive these kinds of government requests related to our AI products, we did proactively develop a preliminary process for reviewing and acting on such requests. You know, it may not be the Rolls-Royce of such a process, but it is a process and you can use it. And it's grounded in our learnings from our processes for traditional government takedown requests, with which we have a fair degree of experience. And also in the GNI principles and implementation guidelines, which obviously reference the key human rights articles. So we built the capability to create custom geo-restricted responses to certain prompts on the basis of an evaluation of a government order. And that's based on legality and human rights principles. And the other good thing is that our models are open, or many of them are, and they can be downloaded and run offline in a way that is inherently more resistant to surveillance and to censorship. So I'll stop there. These are very, very early days, and understanding of potential human rights risks and mitigations in this area are going to evolve incredibly, and we look forward to continued multi-stakeholder learning and dialogue.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Appreciate there's a lot to go over, and thanks for the very succinct, focused summary on that. Nick, perhaps moving over to you. As you know, you've publicly spoken on several occasions on AI on behalf of Federated Hermes. So, from an investor's perspective, then, you know, what forms of company exposure to government-driven AI interventions, in your opinion, raise the greatest risks?
So, for those I haven't met, I represent Federated Hermes. We are a U.S.-based financial services company with $800 billion in assets under management. From the private sector perspective, we view government interventions in AI as an emerging patchwork of soft and hard regulations that is ever evolving, ever changing, and increasingly complex. For us, the first step in figuring out how to navigate these policies was developing our own. We published our responsible AI policies in 2019, not because any government asked us to, but because we saw it as an opportunity to innovate, to mitigate risk, and to enhance value for our clients. These policies are publicly available and periodically refreshed. They were written from a perspective of best practice rather than legal compliance, designed to transcend political and legal boundaries and ultimately to serve as a North Star for us to navigate this technology and the emerging patchwork of government interventions. To be clear, we are not special for having responsible AI policies. Lots of companies have them. We were one of the first asset managers to put them in place. But now that it's been 6 years, where the rubber hits the road is on implementation. What that looks like for us is engagement and dialogue with the companies we provide capital to. We send the companies we finance our responsible AI policies and ask them to develop their own. We also ask them to demonstrate governance structures to ensure board oversight of these policies, board members with AI expertise, and board committees with AI oversight in their charters. We believe companies that put these measures in place proactively will be better prepared to comply with incoming regulations and to manage related risks. We believe some of the lowest hanging fruit for companies when it comes to AI and human rights is in their workforce. We know this technology is changing workforces, creating jobs and opportunities for some, while disappearing jobs and opportunities for others. We've been asking every company we talk to about the impacts of AI on their workforce, strategies for upskilling and training, and strategies for mitigating adverse impacts, including layoffs and wage suppression. The insights gathered from these engagements indicate that companies are verbally committed to ensuring AI benefits their workforce, but they don't have data or evidence proving that's the case. Going beyond workforces, we recognize there is potential for adverse impacts far greater than that. And so we do expect companies to maintain strong commitments to baseline digital rights of privacy and freedom of expression. This is where our involvement in and membership in the GNI comes in handy. We do reference GNI policies on freedom of expression and privacy in our own policies. We also engage with companies on the rights of children. The industry focus on children for a long time has been around prevention of exploitation. And we agree that that's important, but we also think that is a low bar. And so we are pushing companies to consider the best interests of children in the development and design of AI products, and asking for a coherent corporate response to children's social media addiction. Last but not least, we are asking companies to obtain user consent for their collection, storage, and usage of data. User consent is a legal requirement in the GDPR and possibly other laws. But the problem is that companies fulfill this requirement by having users check the terms and conditions box, and nobody reads the terms and conditions. And so we are asking companies to more proactively educate users on how they're using their data, to simplify terms and conditions to make them easier to read and easy to understand for the majority of users, and to obtain not just consent, but free, prior, and informed consent. That is the standard that we are bringing to the market because we feel it will mitigate risk to users and to companies and other parties involved.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yep. So we have 22 minutes remaining. So I will ask one question to the panelists and then open it up for questions. And if I could ask the panelists to keep the responses brief so that we have an opportunity for as many questions as possible in the remaining time. So as we are in Argentina, and as we do have elections in Argentina very soon, I could not resist but to ask this question, right? Which is, what role do you see as panelists for the role of AI in shaping political outcomes, I guess more contemporarily in Argentina, but also broadly in other jurisdictions? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, go for it.
Discúlpenme los argentinos.
My apologies
Bueno, yo creo que
to
por lo que
Argentinians.
he visto también en las noticias,
From what I've read in the
justamente,
news,
en el caso del presidente actual de
in the case of the current
está de alguna manera
Argentina's
aprovechando
president,
el tema de
he
IA,
is
¿no? para apalancar la
leveraging
popularidad,
the
política que
AI
tiene
in
a
order
través de
to
esta,
leverage
inversión que se ha
the
mencionado, que
political
presuntamente OpenAI quiere
popularity.
hacer en Argentina, que era
Eh,
un monto exorbitante,
the-
me corregirán los argentinos,
Argentina will correct me if I'm wrong. She's talking about $23 million. OpenAI was about to invest that amount, although OpenAI said it was not that much, but this is having a political use so that the campaign goes to their favor. Beyond other uses of AI, not necessarily in these elections, but also with other purpose, for instance, national security, fighting against organized crime, face identification. In Buenos Aires, there is a law that prevented this technology to be used. This is an example, but this does not mean that it cannot be used for other purposes other than human rights.
Thank you very much, Cristian. Would any of our other panelists like to contribute? Yeah, Miranda.
Yeah, be clear, I cannot speak to how AI might be influencing electoral dynamics in Argentina. But I can say one example of the application of AI is the very powerful benefit that improvements in models have had to power our integrity systems. So as we all focus on risks, the fact that we can deploy increasingly precise technologies for integrity to mitigate electoral risks, hate speech risks, discrimination risks, harassment risks, dangerous organizations and terrorism risks at an increasingly low cost is actually one of the ways that we will be deploying AI to help safeguard the platforms and platform integrity in the context of these elections. Thank you.
Great point. Would any of our other panelists like to contribute? Yeah, Marlena?
Yes, thank you, Miranda. And also I would like to challenge that statement because it's not so much of a silver bullet. There definitely are adverse impacts of using increased automation, especially for high stakes areas like elections and information integrity. And in fact, increased use of LLMs or other forms of emerging technologies have shown to not work really well in areas where there is constant change. The way that machine learning or LLMs work is statistics on steroids. So every time something changes, which especially happens in electoral times because there's a lot of change very quickly, the systems do not work as well. They definitely don't work well for protests, for different types of assemblies. So yes, and I would just put a little bit of a caution on that statement.
Yeah, if I can respond, absolutely. I don't mean to suggest that they are a silver bullet. I just mean to say that the improvements in AI technologies that are occurring now do offer increased accuracy, right? It's not that we think that you can only deliver integrity, which is itself an unattainable goal, through an automated system is not correct. That's why we have a quite elaborate and have invested many years in different kinds of violence prevention and electoral integrity things, but rather some of the technical improvements are enabling a greater technical precision at a lesser development time and lesser cost than was previously the case. So I don't mean to present it as a silver bullet, but rather the capacities with the technological increases we are seeing are greater and more accurate than they were, and that is, broadly speaking, coupled with other systems, a good thing.
So perhaps, did you want to add something? Or? Go ahead. Okay, so that's a good segue perhaps into the audience questions. So yeah, if we could take 3 questions, we have about 16 to 17 minutes for questions. So if we could take 3 questions in one shot, and then we can have the panelists answering, and we'll move to the next 3 set until the end. Wow, that's a lot of questions.